one of the hardest things to do is to get your first round of financing. That's why I took 30 visits the first time and far fewer subsequently. And it's probably one of the injustices in the system. And you can do that, and you can help overcome that by sharing some of the equity with perhaps a more experienced person or using advisors and mentors. But there is a bias against first-timers, especially during tough times.
It's breadth and depth of experience. So breadth is understanding the outsourcing component, the regulatory component, the international aspects going on, and the rapid shift in the city's management changes all the time. So having staying up on that is key, and then the depth of technical understanding. One thing I learned really quickly is the network is incredible. The moment we did all the stops: Boston, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Palo Alto, San Diego. I wasn't on the plane when my BlackBerry was signaling from people that they had heard that I was just in this location. So that network, so what's happening is people are checking, doing reference checks, what's their experience. So that's always working, and appreciating that when one goes and does the next presentation is good to do.
Private equity and venture capital compete for deals, but more often they club together. So they're more like partners than they are competitors, I find.
That's absolutely true. It's not a cutthroat environment. It's very collaborative, and it's extensive sharing information to the extent that, except for confidential side. But especially on the people side, one piece of advice is never tell different investors a different story, because they're going to cross-check in 5 minutes. You're going to lose credibility. So you have to be very, very consistent with the information you communicate.
Christina, you made a comment earlier about a lot of venture capital money going into green technologies. And I just wanted to, actually I'm going to throw probably a difficult question at you with respect to that. But being a former pharmacist, I'm wondering, because of what's been going on, and actually also in the news, I think ABC News had a segment about unwanted medications and medications passing through the body going into various waterways, that this is a tremendous potential that we need to address from a health and safety standpoint, not only environmental. But do you think that Big Pharma is looking at this, and do you think that they might be willing to invest some sort of seed money to probably educate or also look at alternatives to what is going on, so that we don't create issues for our children and grandchildren, and as well as the environment? Or is this something that maybe they are willing to put money into to evaluate?
My first reaction, without thinking it through, what a great question, is Big Pharma has much bigger problems. The Big Pharma model is no longer working. It's worked very successfully. It's been probably second to oil, the most successful industry of all times. It's no longer working, and the model is broken, and there have been a number of approaches thrown at it: translational medicine, reduction, a number of different paradigm shifts. But the model is no longer sustainable on a cost level, which is why we're seeing the huge layoffs. They just can no longer survive. And this is coupled with something that I wanted to emphasize again, we're in the most conservative regulatory environment we've been in for a very long time. So when you look at investors and risk assessment, look at pharma and so forth, and therapeutic areas people go in, a lot of it reflects where the FDA is right now. And in some cases, it's at an extreme kind of time in terms of willingness to take any kind of educated risk. So I think Big Pharma would probably, this is probably way down the list. Some of the large pharmas do have venture funds, like Novartis, like GSK, a number of them do, but they're really different kinds of funds, and I don't think it's sort of trickled down to the sort of the green tech or the aspect that you're bringing. But I think it's a great business idea for someone to look at that. I do know that a number of the life science venture capital firms, including some of the top tier ones, have now are sort of reinventing themselves a little bit, or allotting more towards this area of green tech, blue tech.
I think it's not an issue of people disposing of the meds. I think, as you say, it's more sort of passage and elimination from all of the humans that are on pharmaceuticals. Yeah, it's just becoming a big issue, and who knows what the solution is. But I think that, none of the pharmaceutical companies are worried about that right now. It's more sort of going to be on a local level than anything.
The cost of drug development is no longer sustainable. So, we've all heard the numbers. Many in the audience are extremely knowledgeable about this space. Anywhere from 800 million to 1.6 billion spent per drug to bring a drug to approval. So I think it's the high cost coupled with a much higher risk. And the much higher risk is driven by all the novel targets that have been generated by the decoding of the human genome almost 10 years ago. Initially, there was a stampede towards those new targets, assuming that they would be the answer, they'll provide the answer to all diseases. Then we've learned that a lot of them are not necessarily clinically meaningful, or not necessarily by themselves, and it's much more complicated than dealing with all the off-target toxicity that people are not quite prepared. So actually the bar and the cost of these novel approaches has gone up. So I think it's and clearly companies know they cannot make a lot of money with follow-on medications, and this is sort of the approach of the past. So you're trying to be breakthrough and cutting edge, but it's a much higher risk, much higher cost. You spend a lot more, and drugs are taken much later, to a much later phase to find out if you have a drug or not. That's why there's so many efforts in the translational area to try to see, can you tease out a signal earlier on to educate you on whether you should move the program forward or not, after you've only spent maybe 50 million as opposed to 700. So I think that it's the higher risk coupled with the current FDA status that have made, like just in diabetes now, there's going to be longer follow-up, more pivotal trials, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that's where we are. And clearly, the large pharmas aren't doing well. As the gentleman before alluded to, they have a horrible social public perception, which is probably second only to probably oil. So certainly anything they can do to rectify that. And everybody's trying to change the model in their own way by creating different kind of metrics and but we don't really know what the answer is.
My perspective is that it's a scale issue. If you look at the one end of the spectrum, the academician that runs a university lab, they're generating dozens of publications on an annual basis. That's an indication of productivity and advancement of the work going on. When you go to the other end of the spectrum, so I came from a 20,000 employee, but that's still relatively small for a big pharma. You're talking 100,000 employees. The progress slows down exponentially because there are more and more humans involved. So you've got the social issues that you've got to deal with. But just being able to make progress and make decisions on advancing programs, as I said, slows down exponentially. So it's just not going to work, and then the cost goes up. So I think that there's some critical mass that's required that will actually make it a much more efficient and productive industry. And I think I'm at one end of it, and I don't know what the best end is, but I think we're searching for it. And one of the things that capitalism will tell us is what that right part is.